Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the FFA Way podcast. I'm your host, Madison Polly, and today's episode is a little bit different, and it's about losing. And not just any loss, but loss in FFA. Because recently I lost my chapter officer election, and that sentence is simple, it's short, and it sounds like just another thing that happens in FFA. But for me, it carried 2 years of effort, growth, preparation, and belief behind it. So we're going to talk about it. For the past 2 years, I didn't just want to be a chapter officer, but I worked toward it intentionally. I stayed late after meetings, stepped into leadership roles, and took on responsibilities as a committee chair, and gave everything I had to making my chapter better, stronger, and feel more connected. I studied what good leadership looked like. I listened to retiring addresses, I practiced speaking, and I tried to become someone who didn't just wear the jacket, but lived what it stood for. So when I say I lost, it wasn't just losing an election to me. It felt like losing something that I had been building towards for a long time. And I'm sure a lot of you guys understand that feeling. And I want to be honest here because I think we don't talk about this enough in FFA. It really hurts when you lose. There's no polished way to say it, it just hurts. And it's hard to put so much of yourself into something, to genuinely believe you've grown into this role, and then you hear your name not get called. And it's hard to smile in that moment and to clap for others, to hold your composure, while part of you is quietly asking, what more could I have done? And if you've ever been in that position, whether it's an officer election, a proficiency award, a speaking contest, or anything you care deeply about, you probably know exactly how that feels. And here's where the story shifts. Because losing, as much as we try to avoid it, has a way of teaching you things that winning never could. After everything settled, I had sat with myself, not as a candidate, not as someone chasing a title, but as a person and an FFA member. And I realized something that I think a lot of us need to hear. Losing that election did not take away the leader I've become. It didn't erase the hours I spent serving my chapter, and it didn't undo the relationships I built. And most importantly, it didn't diminish the impact I've already made. Because leadership in FFA was never defined by a position, but it was defined by action. And this is where the conversation gets deeper. Because once the initial disappointment fades, you're left with something most people attempt to avoid. Reflection. Not the kind you post about, not the kind that sounds good in a speech, but the real kind. Where you sit there and ask yourself questions you can't fake your way through. Questions like, why did this matter so much to me? Was I chasing the role or the recognition that came with it? And those questions, they're not meant to tear you down, but they're meant to build you into something more honest. Because losing has a way of stripping everything back to what's real. It removes the title, the spotlight, the external validation, and then the only thing you're left with is your why. Why you joined FFA in the first place. Why you chose to lead. Why you kept showing up even when no one was watching. And if your why was real before the election, then it's still real now. And that's the part no result can take away from you. So now comes the part that really defines you. Not the moment your name wasn't called. Not the work you put in leading up to it, but what you do after. Because response is where leadership becomes real. It's easy to lead when things go your way, and it's easy to be confident when you're affirmed, recognized, and chosen. But leadership that only exists in success is fragile. It deepens on outcomes instead of character. In this moment, this exact very moment, is where character gets built. The first thing I had to learn was this. You are allowed to feel it. You're allowed to be disappointed, you're allowed to be frustrated, and you're allowed to sit in that space for a little while and acknowledge that something you care deeply about didn't turn out the way you hoped. Because pretending it doesn't hurt doesn't make you strong, but it makes you disconnected from your own growth. And at the same time, you cannot stay there. Because the longer you sit in disappointment without direction, the easier it becomes to turn it into doubt. So I started asking myself a different kind of question. Not, why didn't I win? But, who do I want to be now? Because that question puts the control back where it belongs. With you. Do you want to be the person who slowly steps back? who shows up less, who lets this one moment shrink your involvement? Or do you want to be the person who leans in even more? The one who proves to yourself more than anyone else that your commitment was never conditional on a title. And here's what that actually can look like. It looks like showing up to meetings with the same energy, even when no one expects you to. It could look like supporting the officers who are elected, genuinely, even if it's hard. And it could look like continuing to lead in the spaces you already have, your committees, your teams, your classrooms, even your community, because leadership doesn't disappear when a title does. It just becomes a choice instead of a position. And I'm going to be honest, this part isn't easy. There will be moments where you question why you're still giving so much. There will be moments where it feels like your effort goes unnoticed. There will be moments where it would be easier to pull back. But that's exactly why that matters. Why that very moment matters. Because anyone could lead when it's convenient, but not everyone chooses to lead when it's difficult. And maybe this is the part we don't talk about enough. This is the kind of response that builds a different kind of respect. Not the kind that comes with a title, but the kind that comes with consistency, integrity, and resilience. The kind where people start to see you not just as someone who wanted to lead, but as someone who is a leader, regardless of circumstance. So if you're in this place right now, here's something to carry with you. Your next chapter in FFA isn't determined by what you didn't get, but it's determined by what you choose to do anyways. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you could do is to keep showing up, even when it's hard, uncomfortable, even when no one's clapping for you. Because that version of you, that's the one who grows the most. And who knows, maybe one day you'll look back on this moment, not as a time you lost, but as a time you decided exactly who you were going to become. And at some point, after you felt it, after you've reflected, after you made the decision to keep showing up, you start to see things differently. Because losing forces you to ask a question most people never stop to consider. What does winning actually mean? For so long, I think I defined winning in a very specific way. It was hearing my name called, earning the position, finally having something to show for all the work I had put in. And on the surface, that makes sense. But the more I've thought about it, the more I've realized something that completely shifts that perspective. If winning is only defined by an outcome, then most people are losing most of the time. And that doesn't make sense in an organization like FFA where growth is happening everywhere and every member every single day. So I started redefining it. Winning is not just a title, but it is becoming someone who is capable of leading regardless of recognition. Winning is the moments no one sees, the conversations, the effort, the consistency. It is the decision to care even when it's not required. Winning is growth. And here's the part that changed everything for me. You can lose an election and still be winning in every way that actually matters. Because think about it. Over the past 2 years, I've grown more confident in speaking. I've learned how to better lead a team. I've built relationships that mean something. I've stepped into responsibilities that push me so far outside of my comfort zone. And none of that disappears just because I didn't get elected. If anything, that is the win. But redefining winning also requires something else. Letting go of comparison. Because it is so easy to look at people who were elected and start measuring yourself against them. To wonder what they had that you didn't, and to question where you fell short. To quietly turn someone else's success into your own self-doubt. But that mindset will trap you if you let it. Because their journey is not your standard, and their path is not your timeline, and their success does not take away from your growth. In fact, one of the most powerful things you can do in this moment is choose something that feels almost counterintuitive. Be genuinely happy for them. Not in a forced way. Not in a surface level, I'm supposed to say this kind of way, but in a real way. Because when you can celebrate someone else's success, even when it's something you wanted really bad, you prove something about your character that no title ever could. And you prove that your leadership isn't rooted in competition, but it's rooted in purpose. And that's when everything starts to shift. Because instead of asking, why didn't I win? You start asking, how can I keep growing? How can I keep serving? How can I make an impact right where I am? So winning isn't a moment. Maybe it's a mindset. Maybe it's waking up and deciding that your effort still matters, your presence still matters, and your journey is still going somewhere meaningful, even if it doesn't look the way you expected. Because at the end of the day, FFA was never about a single position. It was meant to shape people. And if you're growing, if you're learning, if you're continuing to show up with purpose, then you're not behind and you're not overlooked. You are not less than. You're winning in a way that lasts a lot longer than a title ever could.